Hello, good friend. My goodness, we've had a lot of life together. I've been doing a lot of reflection here at the end of the year. I'm not dying. Well, we're all dying. But anyway, here's a news. Some news, in fact. Remember when shows like this were fun? What I mean is that making fun of politics specifically used to be kind of fun. It's hard to do puppet jokes about multiple political assassinations, but we try. You should like us and subscribe to us because we try. But remember George W. Bush? Sure, he was a divisive president, but he was a fun, folksy guy who was genuinely charming. He was our great big dummy, the guy we all loved to imitate regardless of whether you were a fan of his politics. It's just a fun voice to do. You know, I news long for the news days when we used to make fun of Truthiness and strategery and other Bush misspeakitudes. I mean, look at him. Look at his little tie. He used to give us gifts every single day, like an advent calendar of celebrated mediocrity. Things like forgetting popular aphorisms in the middle of reciting them, or getting shoes flung at his head for reasons I forget, or being portrayed by Will Ferrell. Yep, those were the days that I'm definitely remembering fully. Adorable Bush. Wouldn't hurt a fly. One moment. Sorry. I'm now hearing that he wouldn't hurt an American fly. Heard a lot of things, overseas. Oh, right. Katrina, forgot about that. Well, I'm sorry, how many executions when he was governor? Reminder, George W. Bush was a terrible president. Well, then what did he say? Oh, no. You shut that down today. Block his text as a red flag. Sorry, I gotta go. I'm at work. Hi, I'm here. I'm present. So George Wubba Bush, not to be confused with George Hubba Wubba Bush, he's been on my mind lately, and not simply because of Cheney's recent death. Oh, he's waterboarding the angels now. See, there are a lot of current events that are either reflective of or due to the presidency of GWB, something that we are about to devote 2 whole episodes to. And for this first episode, we'd like to simply remind our older audience and educate our younger audience about what things were really like during Bush's time in that roundish office. And no better place to start than his rise to power. Because while it doesn't get mentioned nearly as often as Trump's nepotism, the Bushes are one of the oldest political dynasties in America, similar to the Kochs or the Clintons or the DeLuises. George Hubba Wubba Bush was the head of the CIA and served as Ronald Reagan's vice president until he took over the big chair in 1989. W is Bush Sr.'s oldest son, who conquered the Texas Rangers and ruled Texas as its governor beginning in 1995. He was then appointed to the presidency by the Supreme Court in December of 2000 after a violent mob of Republican operatives halted a recount in Florida, where his brother Jeb was governor at the time. Really, I bet some of you forgot or didn't know about the violent mob part of that story. It's an absolutely wild moment in history that just does not come up that often at all. More on that later. Like, the general badness and unjust nature of every aspect of his presidency is something we're all aware of. But for some reason, many of the details about W have been cute-washed over the years. I blame Michelle Obama and no one else! Get her! So let's talk about Bush, the Nepo baby, turned governor, turned president in our first little segment. Yes, we're doing segments. Growing a Bush. I love segments. They're like chapters for videos, and I get a little rest to do stuff, like tweet. So as I foretold, George W. Bush skated through his entire pre-White House life on the strength of his last name. Wubbalicious is like a little clone of his dad. He went to Yale, he joined the armed services, he got into the oil industry, and then he ran for public office. And Bush Sr. pulled more strings for his baby boy than Geppetto, although he would have tried to waterboard Monstro, and all hell would have broken loose. He likes water, you fools! Don't do that. Okay, when Bush entered the armed forces, he received a cushy gig in the Texas Air National Guard that allowed him to shadow dodge the Vietnam draft like a breakdancing ninja, the freshest of Shredder's henchmen. Despite scoring a 25% on his aptitude test, which is the lowest possible score you can get without failing, he beat out thousands of other applicants and was sworn in as a pilot the same day. That's what you call a generational talent. After receiving an honorable discharge to go to Harvard Business School, Bush fondled his way into the oil industry during one of its most volatile periods in history. By the mid-'80s, his company Spectrum 7 was millions in debt, but that green last name of his allowed him to leverage a favorable buyout from a major Dallas-based firm called Harken Oil and Gas, which figured having a Bush on their board would be attractive for investors. Everything those Bushes touch always seemed to work out. Everything works out for the Bushes specifically. We'll see. Bush would go on to purchase a share of the Texas Rangers, which put him in $500,000 in debt. In an early display of the decision-making that would come to both define his presidency and title his memoirs, W sold over $800,000 worth of Harken shares in order to pay that debt, triggering an insider trading investigation. But that investigation didn't yield anything conclusive, which I'm sure had nothing at all to do with his last name or who his dad was. Oh, unrelated, but maybe super related, his purchase of the Rangers was facilitated by the previous owner, Eddie Childs, who just so happened to be a family friend of the Bushes. Way too many articles like to point out that Childs used to call Bush young pup, so they were close enough that the man had given him a terminally uncool nickname that everyone knew about. So yeah, Nepo baby, which is fine, sometimes. But perhaps there's a difference between forcing your dad out of acting retirement to star in your indie drama and using your powerful political family name to turn a major baseball team into playthings like your Captain Sisko on the holodeck, especially since this was all leading to an even more powerful position. In a Time magazine interview published in 1989, the year he helped acquire the team and the year his father was sworn into the White House, Bush said that he needed something on his resume if he wanted to be governor, or else people would just assume that his dad had done everything for him. Interesting. Which definitely, it wasn't the case at all with the Rangers. He just committed some light insider trading, allegedly, and borrowed money from a bank where he once sat on the board of directors. That was 100% gumption and 0% being shielded by your dad, the President of the United States of America. Indeed, his ownership of the Rangers and the subsequent construction of a new stadium were both held up as positive contributions Bush had made to the community. But if you noticed, we said he bought a share of the team. Bush was actually a minority stakeholder in the team rather than its owner, and the stadium was constructed with nearly $200 million in taxpayer money. Furthermore, Bush's investment partners were allowed to recoup all their construction expenses by tacking a $1 surcharge onto tickets. So they basically got a stadium for free. What a bailout. Definitely don't think too hard about that bailout word. It certainly won't come back to haunt us. How much money were the taxpayers allowed to recoup, you may be asking? And shame on you for doing so, you ridiculous person. You know Texans never saw one dime of return on that investment. It all went to the team's incredibly wealthy owners, including the president's son, George W. Bush. That's the guy this video's about. That's fun. So even though he blatantly got Texas to pay for his governor's resume, Bush was seen as an energetic and personable disruption to the establishment Democratic leadership. It's hard to believe now, but Democrats had previously held both the governorship and the state house, but began losing their popularity in the mid-1990s. So next comes Bush the governor, the Bushinator, they called him. Both on the campaign trail and after he took office, his primary platform was a tough-on-crime stance that derived downright villainous glee from the idea of punishing criminals. It's like the movie Death Wish as political policy, which is essentially Texas. But it wasn't always. That actually started with Bush. He handed out the fewest pardons of any governor in the state since the 1940s, and at least one person was executed every 2 weeks while he was in office. He loved killing people, equally as much as he loved jailing kids. He eliminated drug treatment programs for inmates, instead vowing to use that money to build more prisons for children. That's not a joke. He specifically ran on building more juvenile detention centers to get these criminals off the streets, and openly defied the idea that juvenile offenders should be treated with anything less than the harshest possible punishment. After all, if you rehabilitate them early, who will he get to execute as adults? During his campaign, Bush met with Texas officials to outline his more child jail stance, and in that meeting, a juvenile probation officer actually pushed back, arguing that these kids need rehabilitation and, God Emperor forbid, some compassion. And reportedly, Bush got very angry at this officer. To quote a 1994 article in Texas Monthly, he does not respond well to criticism. Bush then responded with, quote, "They'll start changing once they realize they're going to get punished every time they screw up." George W. Bush, the man who has never faced a single consequence, angrily said that in public. This mediocre man skins his dick raw to the idea of jailing children. And so does the state of Texas, apparently. Or at least it did in 1995, because Bush beat the incumbent Democrat by almost 8 points. Shucks. As governor, Bush did increase overall funding to public education, but under the condition of adding weird penalties to schools whose standardized test scores fell below a required minimum. Stuff like bonuses for administrators were linked to how well their schools were ranking. The result was improved test scores at the predictable expense of actual learning. See, for example, experts found that reading samples on the tests had gotten noticeably easier, with shorter sentences and less complex words. Because, of course, they did that. That's what happens if you make schools hinge their test scores on getting money. They'll simply make the tests easier every time because they have to. It's almost identical to Bush's all-or-nothing approach with juvenile offenders. It's a punitive measure that completely ignores and devalues the lives of the children in question. Scratch that. It doesn't just devalue them, it assumes they are inherently worthless. How else do you describe a public education bill that obliterates schools if their students aren't performing well enough? That leaves so many children behind, my dude. My dudebia. Oh, my dude. Yeah, but George, it fundamentally misunderstands the point of school in the first place, and of course continues that weird, angry war on education that began with Bush's spiritual Uncle Ronnie and has only grown weirder and angrier with the GOP's new guy.
Today we take a very historic action that was 45 years in the making. In a few moments, I will sign an executive order to begin eliminating the Federal Department of Education once and for all.
Oh yeah, we got him, folks! After 45 long years, the GOP has defeated education! Once and for all, the nightmare is finally over, and Bush helped. So to recap, Bush went from Yale to Vietnam summer camp, to Harvard Business School, to oil tycoon, to Major League Baseball quasi-owner, to governor of Texas, all through almost no direct action of his own. He's like a wealthy slinky, a precious little slinky on a gilded staircase. And of course, we know his next stop on the Mediocrity Express, the goddamn White House for some reason. Gonna need a new segment to deal with this. Starting the steal. I'm good. I'm present. So the 2000 election is where the modern GOP started rearing its angry little head when it began to transition from dog whistling and secretive power consolidation to a Hyborian fighting pit where plausible deniability is meaningless because everybody is wearing the same snake guts. Because yes, as we pointed out in our Reagan videos, this is a long time coming. But Bush Jr. marked a clear evolution, a vital stepping stone on the way to hell. The race between Bush and Al Gore, the incumbent vice president, was extremely close, although Gore had clinched over 500,000 more actual votes than Bush. It all came down to the state of Florida and its 25 electoral votes, as it too often does, almost as though it's been designed that way. On election night, several major news networks were calling Florida for Gore based on exit polling. Republican operatives began furiously calling these networks and demanding that they retract their reporting, insisting that the state was still in play. And by the next morning, Florida Secretary of State Katherine Harris had called the state for Bush. Harris, incidentally, was co-chair of Bush's campaign in Florida and was a Republican appointee of Florida Governor Jeb Bush, W's younger brother. Jeb was supposed to be recused from any involvement with his brother's presidential campaign, but was later revealed to, of course, be an incredibly active part of his brother's presidential campaign right at the end, during the recount that was about to, spoilers, kind of happen. So thanks for that, Jeb. Anything you want to add?
Please clap.
No thanks. So after election night, Bush's victory ultimately narrowed to a margin of just a few hundred votes. That's not even enough signatures for a Snyder cut. Point being, it was close enough to justify asking for a recount. So it was not without good reason when Gore and the Democratic Party successfully sued the state of Florida, both because of the narrow margin and because of a potential error in the counting machines caused by partially punched ballots, which were called hanging chads, which today is one of the top searches on Steam. There was also some confusion over the physical layout of the ballots in some districts, specifically in our current president's own Palm Beach, which had potentially resulted in thousands of Gore supporters accidentally casting their vote for a third-party candidate with zero meaningful support in the state. Of course, at the time, the Republican narrative was that the Democrats were just sore losers, dragging out the outcome of a presidential election for over a month because they couldn't admit they'd lost, which is adorable now that we know what a sore loser really looks like. But at the time, this messaging worked, and many Americans just accepted that explanation. Democrats had lost and were whining about it. Of course, the flip side of that is this was also the first time that the difference between the popular vote and the electoral vote was discussed so openly on the news, specifically that there could be such a big disparity between the two. But the recount was stopped before it was finished, and the Supreme Court effectively declared Bush the president. But wait, I hear you asking. Why was the recount stopped? Very good question, because the answer is fucking unreal, or rather, it's painfully real. The recount was stopped thanks to the human DuckTales villain that is Roger Stone, along with a whole bunch of other honkies. But yes, Roger goddamn Stone was there. Also present, future Bush assistant and longtime conservative activist Matt Schlapp, a man whose last name sounds like weird knockoff booze someone hands you in a hurry. You see, when the Miami-Dade County Canvassing Board was doing their hand recount of election ballots, Republicans put out a telephone campaign encouraging people to go protest the building they were in. The result was this.
Republican protesters chased after them, demanding to see the process.
Boy, that looks familiar for some reason. This became known as the Brooks Brothers riot. Stone and other Republican operatives sought to obstruct the recount until the deadline to certify the state's electoral votes had passed, which escalated into people shoving and punching their way into this building in order to scream at the people trying to do their jobs. After all, the Republican Party had successfully painted the picture of the recount being done behind closed doors and with no oversight, which was not true. So they worked their followers into a frenzy over false cheating accusations, which resulted in Democrats being physically attacked for doing absolutely nothing wrong.
Arrest him! Arrest him!
Republicans even accused a Democrat of stealing a ballot.
Arrest him!
He put it in his pocket and I started yelling, "This guy's got a ballot! This guy's got a ballot!"
Police escorted Joe Geller from the building for his own protection over what turned out to be a training ballot.
So familiar. Anyway, the canvassing board was forced to stop their recount, specifically citing these riots as the reason. The babies won. All the GOP had to do was convince its supporters that they had to stop the steal, trademark, copyright, all rights reserved, and a bunch of fleshy dupes showed up and started punching up the place. Pretty sure there's a word for using violence to obstruct and thwart democratic processes, and that word is terrorism. Kind of feels like maybe that recount deadline could have been adjusted to however long it takes to count all the votes, especially once the violent obstructionist mob entered the picture. But I'm not Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. My dad's boss wasn't the president, and neither was my dad or me. So Bush was awarded the presidency by the Supreme Court and also by his little brother and his dad. Cool. If all of this sounds a lot like the January 6th riots, that's because it was, just on a smaller scale, a test run, if you will. Had the recount been allowed to continue as ordered, it's entirely possible it would have confirmed that Bush had indeed won the state of Florida. Although, according to multiple independent analyses looking at the votes that were discounted, Gore probably would have won. But the GOP bullied their way instead through physical violence and aggressive but flimsy legal action. And a lot of those people just happened to be the same freaks who would help unleash the same kind of blind, stupid rage against the free transfer of power just 20 years later. In fact, 3 people on Bush's legal team that argued to stop recounting the votes, 3 of them are now Supreme Court justices. Boy. The times, they aren't a changin'. The 2000 election was a dress rehearsal for the GOP's current authoritarianism wow strategy, in which they're speed running the Roman Empire by completely skipping bread and circuses. Actually, that's happening next summer. Can't wait. So that brings us to Bush's time as the president. Starting in January of 2001. Solid year. I'm sure it'll be smooth sailing for America after this. But to find out what happens next, you're gonna have to watch some ads first. The suspense! Put in your votes now about what you think Bush's next adventure will be. Sup, bro? We're all bros here, and we've all got that bro who needs some nether side hygiene tips. Seriously, I know you've got that bro, and that bro in your life needs a tushy bidet. I've had a tushy bidet in my broth-room for years now, and I could not bro it more. It was easy to install and made me feel like a frog on a freshly bloomed lily pad. If me and my bros love it, your bros will bro it too. According to Tushy, 99% of people who wash with the Tushy Wave feel cleaner and fresher after going to the bathroom. Is that a scientific survey? Are the other 1% literal bridge trolls? Broles? I mean, who's to say? My Brody cakes? Who is to say my Brody cakes? And listen, every Tushy bidet easily attaches to your existing toilet without the need for additional plumbing. I'm not trying to sell you on some kind of plumbing expedition, broski. So remember, a-hole is only a naughty word if you wipe. That certainly means something. For a limited time, our audience gets 10% off your first bidet order when you use code SMN at checkout. That's 10% off your first bidet order at hellotushy.com with promo code SMN. Bromo Brode. SMN. Look, bros, listen. All right, come here. Come right here. You've been so productive this year. It's time to treat yourself and your bros to a bidet. You deserve to have your butt washed. HelloTushy.com. Promo code SMN. Wash that butt.
Every Christmas, Frosty the Snowman and I used to huddle up in my walk-in freezer and watch Home Alone. But sadly, since I moved to the mountains and Frosty was vanquished by the sun to the shadow realm, all we get to do is a Christmas FaceTime, and that's if the cross-dimensional 5G holds out. So this year, I have found the perfect way to bridge those miles, and it's 1-800-Flowers.com. They deliver fresh, beautiful bouquets that tell Frosty how much I am thinking about him, and they always arrive before he turns into a pool of muddy water with a corncob pipe in the middle. 1-800-Flowers has holiday arrangements, festive centerpieces, and classic roses that come with a 100% satisfaction guarantee that will turn any Grinch in your life into a jolly, happy soul. Listen, folks, I actually do this myself, and I sincerely think that you should too. My mom loves the flowers that I send her from 1-800-Flowers, and when you don't know what to get someone who lives far away, there is no better option than 1-800-Flowers, especially their Christmas bouquet, which will absolutely melt your giftee's heart, similar to the melting that occurs with Frosty once it gets above 45 degrees. Which, let's be real, is often these days. So, beat the holiday rush and save up to 40% off Christmas bestsellers at 1-800-Flowers.com/news. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/news for up to 40% off Christmas bestsellers. You should do it. That's what I think.
Holiday cheer? More like holiday fear, because you're scared of having to debate your relatives about whether or not Elf is a Christmas movie. Oh my God, we do this debate every year. But this is a problem that's easy to solve with IndaCloud, your online dispensary for gummies, flour, pre-rolls, and now zero sugar, 0 calorie sodas. All federally legal THC, DEA certified, lab tested, shipped discreet as the character Elf when he's hiding in the next room while Bob Newhart interrogates Mr. Tagagi about the code for the vault. At first, I was dreading this horrendous annual tradition, but after an IndaCloud soda, I was able to deftly explain why Elf is a Christmas movie, even though it has nothing to do with the holiday other than being set around Christmas and having a couple of Christmas songs in it. And if things get really heated, there are high-dose gummies to help you explain how Elf's clean white tank top gets a little blood on it and then turns a deep brown for the rest of the movie. It's Christmas magic, you dumbos! If you're 21 or older, visit indacloud.co and use code SMN for 25% off and free shipping. That's indacloud.co, code SMN for 25% off, free shipping, and a calmer holiday guaranteed. Enjoy responsibly, and thank you to IndaCloud for sponsoring today's show. Yippee-ki-yay, Elf! It was 9/11. Did you vote for 9/11? If you voted for 9/11, f you then, I guess. Why would you vote for 9/11? Anyway, we were just discussing George W. Bush's rise to political power, leading to his inauguration as president in 2001, a year that did not turn out like the Space Odyssey, with the exception of a couple monoliths turning the human race into crazed animals. So I guess this is that part, the part where we talk about the stuff. You know the stuff.
Our enemies are innovative and resourceful, and so are we. They never stop thinking about new ways to harm our country and our people, and neither do we.
The war on terror, the torture, and the truthiness. That's the stuff. Never forgot. Who could forget? Something that gets lost in many discussions of 9/11's effect on America is that Bush initially had an entirely different presidency planned. He famously received news of the attacks while reading a story to school children in Sarasota, Florida, presumably to determine how much of their funding to revoke before sending them to prison. This was already meant to be his most taxing event of the day. That's why they scheduled it so early before lunch. Instead, he got 9/11'd, and that's going to throw anyone off their game. If you study the clip, you can almost see his interior self log off for the rest of the day. More importantly, you see W, the folksy dummy, completely disappear from his face for the rest of the time he is in the classroom. But I guess I'm gonna say something in Bush's defense. As much as the clip has been mocked, nay, celebrated over the years, there honestly wasn't much else for him to do at that moment, but wait. Sure, he could have jumped up and ran screaming out of the room like Tom Green abandoning a bit, but it was a day of mass confusion and hysteria. This happened years before social media of any kind. YouTube and Twitter do not exist. Facebook is but a twinkle in the eye of a furiously vibrating prep school incel. And Tom from MySpace is still living an impossibly charmed life as a himbo computer hacker free from the public eye. Really, look him up. That guy's life is incredible. That's all to say that on September 11th, there was no such thing as second-by-second updates from people on the ground. Information about what exactly had happened and what was still happening came out at a trickle that entire morning. Most of us saw the second plane hit live on television because we were watching for updates on what had happened with the first plane. The other huge factor in our collective bewilderment was the fact that America was just not prepared for an attack like this. Terrorism was a low priority. Most Americans didn't believe it was much of a concern before 9/11. Airport security at that time was designed to be as minimally invasive as possible to get people through the terminal with the least amount of hassle or delay. 20 years later, we treat airport security like the spaceport in Total Recall. Seems we may have overcorrected a bit in our grief. Probably only on that one thing, though. Everything else we did was perfect. Point is, Bush actually did okay for the first few days. Sure, all he really had to do was stand there and not poop a demon out of his mouth, but he did it. He didn't poop a demon out of his mouth. Great job! Unsurprisingly, he reached the highest approval point of both of his terms in the immediate aftermath of the tragedy, with roughly 86% of adult Americans supporting him. We all came together to work through our feelings of fear, rage, and confusion, but we were primarily united by revenge. And luckily for Bush, the guy who loves executing inmates, revenge was something he could do.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
Yeah, we were pissed off, and not without reason. Of course, if you've seen any gritty revenge movie, you kind of know where it's heading. But at the time, 77% of Americans supported retaliatory military action immediately after the attacks, even if it cost thousands more American lives. In other words, the country was so angry that it was ready to sacrifice more people than it had lost on September 11th to get revenge for September 11th. It's the death wish policy. And we only got more Bronson when anthrax was mailed to newsrooms and congressional offices around the country just a week later. We were under attack! And with the anthrax, it wasn't clear by whom. By that point, Jack Bauer had already waterboarded Scott Ian and the rest of the band to death, so it was anyone's guess. To date, the only person implicated has been a single American research scientist. But at the time, it didn't matter. The United States was invading Afghanistan by October. Not because Afghanistan did 9/11, mind you, or even the Taliban. Specifically, what happened is that a terrorist organization called Al-Qaeda did 9/11. They were largely based in Afghanistan, which was run by the Taliban. Bush demanded they extradite Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, and in response, the Taliban asked for evidence that they did 9/11. And in response to that, we invaded them. Meanwhile, the rest of the country was being inundated with unchecked rumors about the next attack. Everyone my age has a story. I remember being a freshman news dude sitting alone in his dorm room checking AOL Instant Messenger for the latest on the gas attack that was definitely going to take place at a major shopping mall on Halloween night. Our head writer saw a SWAT team come to his workplace because someone found a small amount of powder at the Joann Fabrics next door. The Joann Fabrics was under terrorist attack! But the lines got blurred as the war on terror dragged on. After all, terror is a nebulous enemy, and it's hard to fight an enemy you can't even define. And within a short amount of time, the enemy became Iraq. Because while Bush himself didn't plan for any of this, his cabinet included war hawks like Dick Cheney, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, and Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz. Don't worry, Paul, death's rigid specter stalks you yet, as it does us all. Bush and his little asshole team didn't just want revenge against Al-Qaeda for 9/11. They were more concerned with future attacks originating from other Middle Eastern nations. And they were convinced Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction hidden in Iraq, including nuclear and chemical weapons. They also tried like hell to implicate Hussein in the 9/11 attacks, which he had nothing to do with. Together, they convinced Congress and the American people that Hussein was an imminent threat to continued life on Earth, but more importantly, in America. You see, Americans wouldn't be safe until Saddam was wiped out like a misspelled birthday cake. Keep in mind that when I say they were concerned and convinced of these things, I'm doing them a lot of favors. Cheney had already been the Secretary of Defense under Bush's father, so he had a bit of a history with and interest in Iraq before 9/11. It sure seems like 9/11 was just an excuse to do some stuff he already wanted to do, like calling out of work the same day GTA 6 comes out. So yeah, the United States began an unprovoked invasion of Iraq based on suspicions that the country had been building up weapons of mass destruction over the past decade, which turned out to be mostly hearsay and wishful thinking when it wasn't blatant lies. For example, Bush's little box of angry boy generals were so mad that intelligence reports weren't adding up to the imagined final fight boss encounter that they would use their own communication line to secretly share information that contradicted intelligence agencies and push their own agenda, which would then trickle into the administration's talking points whenever they gave comments on the situation. They literally had their own group chat to circumvent their own intelligence reports, like some kind of Mike Waltz. Bush told the American people that Iraq had attempted to buy uranium and had been amassing a huge stockpile of biological weapons, even though the CIA specifically told him they had no information on the scope of any such program. Colin Powell testified before the UN that the United States had solid intelligence about WMDs in Iraq. But the thing about weapons of mass destruction is they're kind of hard to hide, like a cache of exotic animals in Moe's Tavern. Whether you're looking for nukes or chemical weapons facilities or the infrastructure and resources required to enrich uranium or build a warhead, there shouldn't be this much guesswork involved. Remember, they tagged Saddam for trying to buy uranium, and even that was based on forgeries. He didn't even successfully purchase it, and the CIA flagged his ass based on fake documents. That's like getting arrested for a Photoshop of you buying oregano. Sure, you could play an elaborate shell game if you weren't under surveillance, but America had been nanny-camming Saddam since the early 90s. Again, Cheney had a history there. The CIA probably had pictures of every time he littered, so moving WMDs completely undetected would have been a tall task. Not impossible, mind you. I'm just suggesting that they wouldn't have had to lie so much if the weapons had actually been there. But the speculation and scaremongering were enough, as they usually are. The majority of Americans were convinced not only that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and was close to obtaining nuclear weapons, but that Saddam Hussein was somehow connected to Al-Qaeda and had been involved in the September 11th attacks. He wasn't, and the US sent troops into Iraq on March 19, 2003, and Saddam's army quickly collapsed because of course it did. The US military is a meat grinder. We funnel nearly $1 trillion into defense every year. Only $900 billion? Pathetic! Get those numbers up. No force in history could withstand a full assault from the most well-funded anti-life engine ever created. That's what Darkseid was out looking for when he got his ass kicked by David Thewlis. It's all in the Snyder Cut, folks. You gotta just watch it, okay? But for some presidents, it's not enough to know we have this unbeatable monster. They want to see it kill a bunch of people just to prove to themselves and the world that America is tough. It's bloodthirsty. It's this.
So I really do kind of not only want to see them killed in the water, whether they're on the boat or in the water, but I'd really like to see them suffer. I would like Trump and Hegseth to make it last a long time so that they lose a limb and bleed out a little. Like, I'm really having a difficult time ginning up sympathy for these guys.
Sorry, that was a fun little glimpse into the future and current day. Anyway, by May 1st, Bush was the toughest cowboy of them all, posing on an aircraft carrier with a huge mission accomplished banner hanging behind him.
Major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
Did we though? So it seems the celebration was a little premature, because here we are over 20 years later and the United States is still kinda sort of invading Iraq. See, one thing that Bush's advisors and others who were opposed to the war kept stressing was that no thought was being given to the long term. You can't just invade a country, topple its government, and then go home. Well, you can, but it's a bad idea. Leaving a power vacuum after removing a guy like Saddam Hussein is going to result in worse Saddam Hussein taking control. The version from Hot Shots Part 2, who was part dog. Now, Bush and Cheney and the rest of his hawkish cabinet didn't want to think about any of that, because that's what happens when you put stubborn, incurious racists in charge of everything. It doesn't matter if Iraq doesn't have a government. They're not real people over there anyway. The mission accomplished photo op was specifically about silencing those critics and trying to convince the public we'd just scored a major victory and that everyone would be coming home. As that victory stretched into months and then years and then decades, that mission accomplished banner became more and more embarrassing. But when you tally up all the lives that have been lost as a result of the Iraq War since the day Bush posed in front of that banner, embarrassing no longer feels like the right word. It might be closer to evil. What a dummy, am I right? Look at him dodge that, so fast. What a champ. Hey, fun fact, the guy who threw that shoe was then jailed for 9 months and tortured. Fun times. Anyway, back in May of 2003, Bush had just declared victory in the Iraq War and was trying to take off and leave his friends in charge. His administration created the Coalition Provisional Authority to serve as Iraq's temporary government. But rather than staffing it with civil servants with relevant governing experience, Bush stuffed the CPA with political loyalists and cronies with no idea what they were doing. At the top of this list was Paul Bremer, a businessman with ties to the White House, no governing experience, and absolutely no knowledge of the Middle East. To be F and B, he was a former diplomat and assistant to the, we have to assume, unproblematic Henry Kissinger, whoever that is, okay, as well as a foreign service officer who had been stationed in Afghanistan. But you'd never know that by listening to him speak. On his first day as Bush's presidential envoy to the CPA, he wondered aloud why US soldiers couldn't just shoot looters.
As they drove into the city, Bremer made a decision and promptly announced it to his new staff.
I did one thing that wasn't very smart, which was suggest to the staff meeting that I thought we should shoot the looters, that our military should have authority to shoot the looters, which they did not have at that time.
His point was you only needed to shoot a few of them to make that point, and the looting would stop.
This wasn't very smart to do because somebody on the staff immediately told the press that I had suggested shooting the looters, and we had a problem.
Oh, see, he admits that wasn't very smart to shoot the looters because that would be bad press. That clip is from a Frontline episode called Losing Iraq, and there are many, many, many stories around Bremer that resonate with that powerful Doge energy. This new, inexperienced maverick, shaking things up by boldly suggesting some of the stupidest ideas known to man and then shouting down the seasoned experts trying to tell him otherwise. So Bremer and the CPA were an unchecked disaster. Of course they were. Within a year of Bush's May 1st victory lap, Iraq exploded with economic chaos and violent insurgency that the provisional government was simply not equipped to handle because it was stuffed full of people who'd voted for Bush rather than people with experience in governing or infrastructure. In order to crush the insurgency, the U.S. used Abu Ghraib, a notorious prison where Saddam Hussein had carried out weekly executions, not bi-weekly like in W's Texas, where freedom reigns. Under U.S. control, it became a prison for Iraqi civilians, many of whom were held without charge and were completely innocent of any wrongdoing. Within months, the prison was full of thousands of people, including women and teenagers, because the military would just conduct big sweeps like a bunch of racist shrimp trawlers. Very ice of them. The cruel treatment, hideous torture, and inhumane conditions to which detainees were subjected in Abu Ghraib became one of the biggest scandals of Bush's presidency. Specifically, photographs of U.S. service people abusing and humiliating detainees were released to the media, and those images continue to haunt us. They're referenced in Children of Men. More importantly, it actually fueled the insurgency in Iraq rather than help get it under control, as the wanton abuse of a civilian population tends to do. By the end of Bremer's brief stint in power, billions of dollars were unaccounted for and corruption was rampant. In stark defiance of Bush's mission accomplished banner, and as a direct result of the CPA, the Iraq War officially dragged on for 8 years, killing 4,500 U.S. soldiers and well over at least 200,000 Iraqi civilians. In reality, the Iraq War hasn't really ever ended. We just stopped calling it that. We have troops there now, all or at least partially because George W. Bush put people in charge who were just as unqualified as him. Oopsies on that oopies. I mean oopsies. I'm just like the president. Well, not because of war crimes, because I talk funny sometimes. By January 2004, less than a year after convincing the American people that toppling Saddam Hussein's regime was a matter of life and death, the Bush administration admitted to Congress that none of the intelligence pointing to Iraq's possession of WMDs was accurate. Aw, fudge! The most charitable interpretation of the facts is that they drew irresponsible conclusions from insufficient evidence, but they specifically ignored the evidence they didn't like. They documented that they didn't like it, and were choosing to ignore it in favor of dubious information that supported their conclusion. They found alternative facts, if you will. But the why is more complicated and wrapped up in the politics of previous decades. As I said, there's a history here. Bush's a-hole team of war hawks like Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, and Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice were all members of a neoconservative movement that felt the United States should use the immense unchecked power it held in the wake of the Cold War to essentially bully the rest of the world into peace. Peace being a relative term here, meaning maximum profit for America. Hussein had suffered a decisive defeat during the Gulf War in the early 90s, but his regime remained intact, and he had rejected UN weapons inspectors in the late 90s. So it wasn't like there were no signs Hussein might be up to no good. He was always up to no good. But in the aftermath of 9/11, Bush's cabinet saw Iraq as their proving ground to enforce American dominance. They reasoned that by knocking out Hussein's regime, a democratic nation loyal to the United States would form in its place. And from that foothold, the entire Middle East would be under America's purview, eventually transforming the entire region into obedient allies. It sounds like imperialism, because it is, but like the Iraq War, we just stopped calling it that. Meanwhile, anyone who didn't share this viewpoint was siloed out of Bush's inner circle, particularly anyone who questioned any of the magical thinking involved with the invasion strategy. For example, it was the official viewpoint of the Bush administration that a pro-American democratic government would naturally arise in Saddam's place, and that coalition forces would be welcomed as peacekeepers and liberators. They also firmly rejected the idea that the aftermath of an invasion might be exponentially more costly than the invasion itself. In other words, the Bush administration literally believed that they could take Saddam out and leave, and that eventually everything else would just kind of figure itself out. They'd be able to start cashing their Middle East 2.0 checks right away. as the alternative facts began to seep into his speeches and into his administration's press releases, Bush and his cabinet essentially goaded Americans into war. So yeah, mission not really accomplished, but that photo op was just a prequel, a phantom menace of cruel stupidity, prefacing the creation of an entire alternate reality that would come to define the Republican Party. After all, you can't get in trouble for breaking the vase if you refuse to acknowledge that the vase is broken, or indeed was ever in the house, or that vase is a word in the English language. It's toddler politics, amplified by the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. When you break it down, it's all the same type of obstruction, from the Brooks Brothers riot, to the bad intelligence, to the victory photo op. It's all designed to buy time until they no longer feel like they have to explain themselves. So I guess it worked. Despite all the chicanery involved in dooming the country to another forever war that they ostensibly admitted to lying about, Bush handily won re-election in 2004, easily defeating Senator John Ketchup, the most boring human shape to ever run for office. However, it also didn't help that conservative political action groups cobbled together what was then one of the more despicable political ads in history. Swiftboat Veterans for Truth released a series of attack ads featuring interviews with Vietnam veterans who had served on swiftboats, as Kerry had, making outrageously incendiary claims about the senator's war record, specifically regarding the 3 Purple Hearts, Silver Star, and Bronze Star he had been awarded for his service. Yes, the party of the man who avoided being sent to fight in Vietnam by scoring a 25% on his pilot's aptitude test was attacking the service record of a decorated veteran, a literal war hero. Now, the Vietnam War draft was f***ed up, but I wanted to highlight how very Trump this moment was. A guy who used his money and name to get out of fighting in Vietnam, somehow getting away with talking down to actual veterans about their actual experience there. And everyone just letting him do that. Of course, it helps when Bush himself gets to have this cake and f*** it too, because while these attack ads were running, he's able to go on TV and denounce them at the same time.
That means that ad, every other ad. Absolutely. I don't think we ought to have 527s. I can't be more plain about it, and I hope my opponent joins me in condemning these activities of the 527s. I think they're bad for the system.
See, it's those damn 527 groups on both sides, you see. Bush would go on to praise Kerry's record, but ultimately stopped short of specifically calling out and condemning these Swiftboat ads. At least not until they stopped airing. By the way, exactly none of the members of the Swiftboat Veterans for Truth had actually served on the boats that were under Kerry's command, and their claims were either contradicted by other records and eyewitness accounts, or by other statements of their own. But it didn't matter. As we now have learned, swift boating is an extremely viable tactic if you want to, say, claim the potential vice president lied about his rank with no substantial evidence. So yeah, Bush won re-election. And now, with 9/11, the invasion, and the election all in the rearview mirror, Wubbalicious probably thought it was finally going to be smooth sailing. At long last, he'd get to finish the rest of his pre-September 11th itinerary. He was going to incarcerate some middle schoolers and buy the Florida Marlins and call it a term. Just stand where he was told to stand and run out the clock. What more could go wrong? Well, let's do another ad and then find out what more went wrong. Put in your votes!
Okay, look, if you're anything like me, you're panicking because it's almost Christmas and you haven't done your gift shopping yet because you were busy wondering whether water is the wettest thing. Spoiler alert, I'm like 80% sure that it is. It is indeed the wettest thing. Well, fortunately, if you are still looking for the right gift, Aura frames and makes it look like you've been planning your gift for months. And it can help when you're trying to give a gift to someone you already know so well, like their feelings about the movie Waterworld, or if they think that there's something out there that, maybe is wetter than water. And that's why I am giving Aura frames to all my family members. They love seeing the photos I preload on there, me staring at the water, me testing the pH of the water, me drinking water and orange juice back to back and rating them for their wetness on a 19-point scale. By the way, both got 19s. Wild. And because you can share photos and videos straight from your phone all year long, it is a gift you can keep giving well into July, when even wet things like water become less wet. Because of the heat, silly. You get it. And for a limited time, save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off Aura's best-selling Carver matte frames, named #1 by Wirecutter, by using promo code MORENEWS at checkout. That is AURA frames.com, promo code MORENEWS. This deal is exclusive to our audience and frames sell out fast. So order yours now to get it in time for the holidays. And support the show by mentioning us at checkout, please. Just say, we sent you. That helps us, helps you, helps everybody. Okay. Terms and conditions apply. They made me say that last part.
The holidays are brutal, by which I mean it can be mildly stressful to travel and see family and buy gifts and etc., aka brutal. Luckily, Pluto TV's free movies can help you survive the season. Escape the moderately inconvenient madness with thrilling movies like Fast and Furious 6, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, The Colloquial Kidnapper, The Assassination of William Henry Harrison by the Coward Typhoid Fever and Pneumonia, The Expendables, Closing Time, The Tom Waits Story, Closing Time, The Semisonic Story, An American Tale 4, Fievel in Time, Bad Boys, Cheaper by the Cousin, 2 tickets to Floats in Paradise, The Sleepy Time Bandits, Maniac McGee featuring an even more CGI de-aged version of that kid from Stranger Things, Everything's Coming Up Nixon, Irritable Bowel Syndrome, and Step Brothers. Tons of hit movies that will leave you in stitches. Literally. Figuratively. Sorry, I don't know how I screwed that one up. Plus, it's all free. Pluto TV, television beamed from the farthest reaches of the solar system. Stream now. Hold on. Pay never. Whoa.
If you've ever been in the market for a new home, you know home shopping can be a lot. There's so much you don't know and so much you need to know. What are the neighborhoods like? What are the schools like? Who is the agent and who knows the listing or neighborhood best? And why can't all this information just be in one place? Well, now it is on Homes.com. They've got everything you need to know about the listing itself, but even better, they've got comprehensive neighborhood guides and detailed reports about local schools, and their agent directory helps you see the agent's current listings and sales history. Homes.com collaboration tools make it easier than ever to share all this information with your family. It's a whole cul-de-sac of home shopping information, all at your fingertips. Homes.com. We've done your homework.
Hurricane Katrina is Hurricane Katrina. Welcome back. So yeah, where were we? Bush has been reelected. He's fought the war on terror. He's fought the war on Democrats. And he's probably pretty tired of all the doing stuff. Who knew being president was so hard? And here comes Hurricane Katrina. And listen, this should be a, pardon the pun, breeze for Bush. After all, Bush had sounded the alarm to provide hurricane relief to the state of Florida when a trio of storms struck his little brother's kingdom in the months leading up to the 2004 election. He requested 3 multi-billion-dollar aid packages from Congress and was personally on site to deliver water and ice. Surely he can do that again. Certainly there's no difference between Florida, a state run by his brother that he needed to win that year's election, and New Orleans, a predominantly black city that swings blue. Certainly he'll pull through for them. George Bush doesn't care about black people. Kanye was right about that specifically and not so much a lot of other things. Just days before the Category 3 Katrina struck the Gulf Coast, Bush received reports from his advisors and FEMA officials that the damage could be catastrophic, particularly if the water levees in New Orleans that were long known to have been at risk were to fail. He FaceTimed state officials in Louisiana and Mississippi from his ranch to let them know that the federal government was fully prepared to assist both during and after the storm, pledging every resource at his disposal. Time makes liars of us all, but none so quickly as George W. Bush, because when the storm hit and the levees did indeed break, like Led Zeppelin foretold, those resources W promised never materialized. In fact, disaster recovery for Hurricane Katrina was a humanitarian crisis that immediately spiraled out of control for the exact same reasons that the CFP in Iraq did. Bush didn't take the problem seriously and put his bozo cronies in charge instead of people with experience. Why should political loyalty be a factor in managing disaster relief is an excellent question. Well, it was an excellent question before the guy. Katrina didn't hit New Orleans directly, but the resultant severe flooding and high winds were enough to collapse the city's aging infrastructure. Despite the promise he made to be at the ready with supplies and assistance, Bush was on a speaking tour through the Southwest during the first hours and days of the storm. As the city was flooding, Bush was doing a photo op at a naval base in San Diego, even though he'd been told the situation was worsening. There are literal storm clouds above him in all of the footage.
Floodwaters killed 100 people and forced survivors to clamber to safety.
Hold the rope! Let him pull to the boat!
Bush once again decided to carry on with his schedule, flying to San Diego for an event at a Navy base.
We had a big debate about whether he should go and speak to the troops in San Diego. We felt like we're still at war. There's one thing that the president couldn't be criticized doing is speaking with the troops.
Oh, sure, gotta avoid that criticism by ignoring the deadly hurricane. Eventually, he finally got the message and hopped on Air Force One to fly back to the White House. He did do a flyover of New Orleans to peek out of his window at Americans desperately clinging to their rooftops amid rising water on his way back home. So, that's something. No, really, they even took a picture of him doing it like he's looking at lions on safari. We covered a lot of these details in our episode about FEMA, but the gist of it is that the agencies in charge of rescue, humanitarian aid, and disaster relief had just undergone a massive restructuring under the Homeland Security Act, which had shuffled FEMA under the umbrella of the newly established Department of Homeland Security for some reason. This left the agency with an unclear chain of command or procedure within the department, resulting in delays to critical supplies and assistance. Not that it helped much once that leader emerged. Michael Brown had been appointed the head of FEMA a year earlier after serving as the agency's general counsel and briefly working as an assistant city manager in a suburb of Oklahoma City. And he was almost cartoonishly bad at his job. No, really, a fox in a farmer's disguise would be offended at how boldly unfit he was for his position. As we mentioned in our FEMA episode, his biggest experience with authority was as the supervisor to horse judges. A horse judge. Here he is telling Paula Zahn at CNN the federal government had no idea thousands of evacuees had been stranded at the Superdome and Convention Center for days without food or water.
Sir, you're not telling me you just learned that the folks at the Convention Center didn't have food and water until today, are you? You had no idea they were completely cut off?
Paula, the federal government did not even know about the Convention Center people until today.
Oh, listen to him, talking down to that reporter about how big of an idiot he is. Here he is repeating that claim while Ted Koppel tries to get him to say whether 5,000 or 15,000 people are stuck there needing aid.
It's either 5,000 or 15,000. Do you know?
Actually, I have sent General Honoré of the First Army to find out exactly the truth of what's down there because we first learned of the Convention Center, we being the federal government, today. And that he says the number is around 25,000.
Okay, so it sounds as though the mayor who said 15 to 25,000 was closer in touch.
Wild how TV used to look just like that. All pixelated and junk. Perfectly preserved. Anyway, all of these journalists should just be grateful they got the interview in the first place, okay? You can't be looking a gift horse judge in the mouth. Brown's petulant anger at being confronted with his own inexcusable ignorance is nascent Trumpism on display. Also, he was lying, by the way. The news was already reporting on the people stranded. Also, leaked emails later revealed frantic messages from one of the only FEMA employees on the ground in New Orleans that was alerting Brown to the dire situation at the Superdome and that many people were near death. I'm actually going to quote some of this email because it's severely messed up. Quote, thousands gathering in the streets with no food or water, and hundreds still being rescued from homes, and direct quote, estimates are many will die within hours. Brown responded to that email about all the people who are going to die within hours with 2 sentences. Thanks for update. Anything specific I need to do or tweak? New department, who dis? Stacks of other emails that didn't receive responses reveal that Brown didn't bother to make any tweaks to increase food or supplies from FEMA, even as officials told him Mississippi was only receiving 60 trucks of ice and 26 trucks of water instead of the 450 trucks of each that they required. He was even warned that inadequate supplies could lead to riots, which of course they did. Now, in the interest of the fair and balanced sharing of blame, Katrina was a disaster on every possible level. Local and state entities dropped the ball into the sewer, evacuation should have been conducted much sooner than they had been, and the infrastructure in New Orleans in particular was badly in need of repair and reinforcement. But again, the guy responsible for it all, the person the President of the United States had placed in charge of handling disaster relief efforts in just this kind of situation, was an obvious boob who seemed irritated that whatever it was he was supposed to be doing hadn't already been done for him. That's the George W. Bush way. That's the Donald J. Trump way. That's the American way.
And I want to thank you all for, and Brownie, you're doing a heck of a job. The FEMA director's working 24.
Please clap. Brownie did an even hecker of a job by resigning 10 days after that, by the way. Oh, also, it was all pretty dang racist. Desperate people on the ground grabbing what they needed because Brownie hadn't tuned into CNN to see that they needed supplies that day were frequently referred to by the media as finding supplies if they were white and looting if they were black. And the Bush administration was frothing at the mouth to send in some troops to combat those desperate, starving, and actively drowning American citizens. Louisiana Governor Kathleen Blanco told the country in a press conference that her National Guardsmen were locked and loaded and ready to shoot looters, saying, quote, these troops know how to shoot and kill, and they are more than willing to do so if necessary, and I expect they will. Shoot looters? What do you think this is, Iraq? In response, unofficial majority white militias made of civilians and police began to form in order to defend property against violence and looters, the reports of which were being way overblown by the media. Gunshots fired into the air to signal rescuers got reported as ungrateful hooligans opening fire on rescue helicopters. Career fabulist, war profiteer, and future homicide victim Chris Kyle bragged on the news about sniping no less than 30 looters from his perch atop the Superdome, a f***ed up thing to want to brag about, and a claim that was also debunked as total and absolute horseshit by officials on the ground. 2 unarmed people were shot dead by one of these roving gangs for alleged looting. I'm sorry, wait, correction. Cops. The roving gang was cops. One of the victims was developmentally disabled and was shot in the back and stomped on by the brave militia members, cops, as he died. In another infamous incident, a man named Henry Glover was searching a strip mall for supplies for his infant child when he was shot to death by 5 police officers who then burned Glover's car with his body inside. Guess how many of those cops went to jail for the actual killing? Are you guessing? 0. Exactly 1 cop received a jail sentence, and that was specifically for destroying Glover's body, which was apparently more illegal than his actual murder. Boy, why does all of this sound so familiar? As I've always said, time is a flat circle. It's a classic Cody line. I invented that. Overall, the bungled half attempt at crisis management took the greatest toll on black residents, and nearly half of all those who had died were older than age 74. Despite all this, Bush's first stop in the Gulf Coast after Katrina hit was a predominantly white Republican district. The predominantly black areas, which had been the hardest hit, were not a priority for him whatsoever. Not like Florida had been a year prior, where FEMA's response had been quick and thorough. So, Bush normalized placing his idiot friends in charge of extremely important operations, denying objective reality when it was inconvenient, and awarding disaster relief based on political loyalty. He wanted nothing more than to not have to do anything at all, and he still gave that his best shot. But stuff just kept happening, as it has an annoying way of doing when you're the leader of an entire country. And so this whole video, everything you've remembered or learned so far, is all leading to a conclusion that I really need the young people to retain. Here it is, our final segment. George W. Bush is an asshole. He's an asshole. A bad president and bad person. If you're young and nostalgic for the innocent days of the 2000s, don't be. It sucked. Except for seeing Lord of the Rings and Spider-Man in theaters, it sucked. Rubba W's everlasting image is that of a gentle dummy, but he had objectively one of the worst presidencies of the modern era, and was in charge of several high-profile blunders that cost billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of lives. And then some. Next week, we will be doing a part 2, talking about the lasting legacy of George W. Bush, and spoilers, it's bad. It's Reagan bad, but for this episode, it needs to be stressed that for all the depictions of Bush as this bumbling fool, his actions were that of an angry and mean man, a Trump type. Like, why didn't more of the parodies focus on his contempt for governing? Remember when he campaigned on building more juvenile detention centers, claiming that the problem with juvenile offenders is that they've had it too easy? Or when he tried to reshape public education to strip resources from students who don't score well on standardized tests? Why didn't more political cartoons focus on his deliberate, intentional cruelty to children? Children of a specific race and socioeconomic standing. Instead of portraying W as an amusing dummy, why didn't SNL begin with the cold open of Will Ferrell leading kids on a tour of the White House and shoving hummus up the rectums of the ones who get his questions wrong? Clooney would have hosted that episode, and yes, that was a method of torture we did, by the way, which we will talk more about in the next episode. George W. Bush was a bad man. No, you don't want to have a beer with him. I mean, he famously quit drinking for one, but more importantly, that's not at all what he's like. Even the Bush is a dummy attacks from the left usually portrayed him as folksy, endearing even. A salt-of-the-earth guy you could have a chat with at a barbecue. And maybe you could, if you have enough money. George W. Bush is a cold, cruel, angry elitist who cannot abide criticism and has never attempted to hide his contempt for governing and, by extension, the American people. He's an asshole, a deeply unlikable man who is almost identical to Trump, down to the love of golf.
I call upon all nations to do everything they can to stop these terrorist killers. Thank you. Now watch this drive.
Oh, he's so funny though! And that lovable goof portrayal helped him get by. He got a Bush impersonator to speak at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. He was never angry about it. So no, George W. Bush is not a cute old man who paints pictures of his dog and weird portraits of himself in the shower. He's a cruel aging millionaire, a retired inquisitorial torturer, and a child-hating former statesman who paints pictures of himself in the shower. But who doesn't? I mean, I've made 6 shower paintings. They're all terrible. Covered in water. Can't keep the paint on there at all, really. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. Anyway, cliffhanger! I'm just gonna wait here till next week's part 2, I guess. Here's some, not yet. Okay. Previously on some more news. It's the end of the episode? Okay, well, next time on, I don't give a preview, I just say, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. We got a patreon.com/some more news. We got a podcast called Even More News. You can listen to it or watch it on YouTube twice a week on this channel. You can listen to this show as a podcast, Some More News on the podcast place. We got merch at a merch store. You can buy it. It's up on the screen. And this is blank, but and so is my mind. Bye. Bye.
This ad is brought to you by Vive Healthcare, the makers of Apretude, cabotegravir. You never skip your SPF, and you carry hand sanitizer like an accessory. But what are you doing for HIV prevention? One way to help protect yourself from HIV is Apretude, a prescription medicine used to reduce the risk of getting HIV in adults and adolescents weighing at least 77 pounds. You must be HIV negative to receive Apretude and get tested before each injection. If you think you were exposed to HIV or have flu-like symptoms, tell your doctor right away. More HIV testing may be needed. Apretude does not prevent other sexually transmitted infections. Practice safer sex to reduce your risk. Get Apretude as scheduled. Missing doses increases your HIV risk. Don't take Apretude if allergic to it or taking certain medicines that may interact. Tell your doctor about your medical conditions, liver problems, and mental health. Serious side effects include allergic reactions or rash, liver problems, and depression. If these occur, get medical help right away. The most common side effect is injection site reaction. Bring your A game and talk to your doctor. Learn more at apretude.com or call 1-888-240-0340.